Greetings everyone, in this video I'll be covering not one, not two, but three alternative ways that you can paint your noise marines. I'll be covering brushwork, airbrushing, contrast paints, and the nice thing about this video is that you can cherry pick the methods and techniques that you want and apply them to your Emperor's children. I'm Nate the Feral Painter and welcome to the video. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Noise Marines video. As I've mentioned, this is sort of a continuation from my previous video, so if you do want to go over and check out that video as well, then please do so, as there are some parts in this video that we sort of skip over because I've already done them in that video. Again, all the colours and everything and all the recipes will be in the description below, and it'd also help me out if you could just take this 1 second, if you enjoy this video, to click that like button, and if you're new here, then consider hitting that subscribe button. You will probably notice in this video that two of the Noise Marines are a little bit kit bashed, and to do this you can check this video out right here where I go into detail and explain all the little nuances and ways that you can kit bash not just Noise Marines but any of your Space Marine projects, just to make them that little bit more grimdark. I did go quite heavy on the wiring, as I had a theory that, you know, the Noise Marines have tweaked and modified their armor and their speakers a little bit just to pump out that extra little bit of ampage. But again, be sure to check that video out if you're wanting to, you know, kit bash yours and make them a little bit more interesting and push it into that grimdark aesthetic. The nice thing about this video as well, and all the color recipes, is that they are modular. Just because I'm doing one with an airbrush doesn't mean you can't implement that onto a brushwork. It's really modular, this paint scheme, and feel free, if you like the colors of one of them and you want to transfer them to another, or take a bit of the armor trim and put it into another Space Marine. It's really nice to experiment with these colors, and I do probably recommend that if you're doing an army, is try and make them a little bit more individual and then just try and cross them over. So don't think just because I'm saying I'm using this color for this that you've got to use it through an airbrush or a contrast paint. You can apply this in whatever and however fashion that you like. Again, all the colors are in the description below. So all the Noise Marines were given up a prime of black. I use the Stynalrez black primer. However, you can use your alternative favourite primer, whether that a rattle can or an alternative airbrush brand. Whatever black you like to use that one. Now, the only one that we're going to apply a zenathol to is the first one, which is going to be the contrast method. And for this, I've obviously used a white Stynalrez white primer through my airbrush, just to from above. If you've got a rattle can, do it with that as well. And what's nice about this color scheme with the contrast paints is if you do have an airbrush, you can apply the contrast paints through your airbrush. If not, you can simply use the brush. Now, I also did test out a scheme using these exact same colors, but just altering the base and the prime. So obviously we've primed it up, and then what I did for the alternative one, if you want more of like a metallic-y theme, which you'll see a little bit later on with the trim, then just add a really bright silver zenathol over the top of your black primer, and then follow the rest of this contrast color scheme just to get an alternative look. So the first contrast paint we're going to apply to this miniature is Magos Purple. Now, it is a really nice darkish purple, which is great for our shadows. So if I'm using an airbrush, I'm going to apply it from underneath upwards and just ignoring those white top shoulder pauldrons. Now, it is a bit of a weaker color, the Magos Purple, so if you're going to apply it through a brush, you can just apply it over the entire miniature just using your brush. You might have to have a couple of coats in the shadow sections, and then for the rest of the areas, I'm going to come in with the contrast paint Voluptuous Pink. This contrasts really nice against those darker purples, and it'll just push it into that pinkish purpley tone or magenta tone that the Noise Marines and the Emperor's Children are more seen with. And that's pretty much it for this first little color scheme before we get into the rest of them. I'm going to go over the color schemes first of all, and then we'll move into like the weathering and the trim and all the accessories like that a little bit later later on in the video. But this one is the contrast method. It's really easy, you know, if you're into your slap chops, you could get away doing it a slap chop style using these paints as well. But I just really like that voluptuous pink over the top of the magos purple, and if you do find it's not as strong as you want, you can just simply go back in there with a little bit of white just to highlight it up a little bit, and then continue with the rest of your miniature. For the second noise marine, the one that we're going to use for the airbrush method and to paint his black armor, and these colors are the exact same colors that I'm going to move on to in just a moment for the brushwork video. But as this one is more entirely black with the purple trim, for this I'm going to use something, I wanted to push it, something that's going to contrast really nice against that pinkish purple tone, and for this I wanted like a teal blue. It's more black armor, but it pushes into that teal blue sort of highlights, and for that I'm just going to give it a base coat of Night Lord's blue, and then I'm going to slowly start to add the Army Painter's bright sapphire up for the highlights. Now I'm just going to mix in it 50-50 for the first highlight and then on its own for the final highlight, and these are the exact same colors as what we're going to move on to in just a second, so you sort of know where we are for reference, but I'll teach you how to do it in the brush method. But with this, it's just an airbrush method with the black primer, added the Night Lord's blue, then a little bit of the bright sapphire, and then finally the bright sapphire on its own on the brightest sections. Now it might go on there a little bit light at first, but don't worry, a little bit later on we are going to dull this a little further down with the weathering stages. And that's pretty much it for the second one using the airbrush. Just a very simple black armor method, and then we can now move on to the brushwork. And speaking of the brushwork, now let's quickly talk about how to apply these paints using just your standard paintbrush. Now it would be easy to just get your paintbrush and slap these on, but there's a more effective way that we can do it, and this is obviously using the dry brushing stippling method. Now I do really enjoy this method, and sometimes I combine it with some airbrushing just to get some nice smooth highlights and things like that. But the way to do this is to get your Night Lord's blue first of all, put some on your wet palette, and you want to thin this a little bit. If you're figuring out, you know, how much to thin it, people always ask, you know, what's your dilution ratios, and I can never give you an exact one. This comes down to things like humidity and how old my pot of paint is, because if you know, I can go out and get Rhinox hide and it'll be a nice like thin paint, and by 3 months to 6 months that's just going to be a big like clumpy mess, so it requires that little bit more thinning. So this is just something that you're going to have to experiment with your pots of paint, but 50-50 is around the mark where you want to aim for. Now when you first put it on, it's going to look quite intense, and that's due to the water, but once it settles down it's going to dull down quite a lot, so you might need to do a couple of passes, and this is where the mottled and like armor and chipped effect really comes into play, because you're building up those layers one after another. But by the time you've done the front of the marine, you know, the back of it's going to have dried, so you can come back to the front and vice versa. But I'm just going to work my way, just stippling. I'm just being haphazard here, I'm not really taking care, I'm just stippling it on and getting those colours down. Now of course we are going to start to introduce and add the bright sapphire to that Night Lord's blue, and I just start to mix in a little bit at a time and just again go back to stippling it on. But when you're doing these second passes and moving up your highlights, you just really want to then start to pay attention to the areas that your highlights are going to be. So if you've got like your light coming from top down, it's obviously going to be places like the shoulder pauldron, the backpack and the knee pads and some of the elbow, or you know, just areas that are exposed to that light. So just make sure you are paying special attention to those areas, and once you're done you should have something that looks a little bit like this. Now if you are interested and you want it to make it look that little bit smoother, then I'd just recommend using dry brushing. And one little tip I will give you throughout these videos, if you're wanting some amazing dry brush work, then go over, I'll link it below, to the Artist Opus way of dry brushing. It's unbelievable how he does it. I do know how he does it, it's just I've never been able to replicate it as clean as what Byron does at the Artist Opus. But I'd really recommend going over and watching that video. It'll transform the way you paint and use dry brushes. But I do like this stippling method just because I like the mottled effect that you get when you're finished. Now the technique of using those brushes, and applying that mottled effect is going to come into play for our purple tones. And I've done the exact same techniques using the same brushes, but I've just altered the colours a little bit. So for this, I've used the Naggaroth Night, and then I slowly start to introduce Emperor's Children, and as my very final highlight, I'm going to use a little bit of fulgrim pink. So as we did with the blue, I'm going to come in with the Naggaroth Night and start to stipple that on in that mottled effects that I've talking about. I start to add the Emperor's Children and then introduce a little bit of the fulgrim pink. You want to be very sparingly with this, but I'm going to show you a way that you can knock it back a little bit at the end if you want to do that. But when I get to the final highlight points, and you know, to add some scratches, and if you want to do some edge highlights, you can do that as well. But I'm going to switch to a regular brush. And what I like to do with this is, now I can control the stipples a little bit smaller rather than having that big flayed brush to get everything down. I'm going to start to control those stipples a little bit more and pull everything in a little bit tighter using those highlighted colours. And for this, you know, you can use the stippling, or you can even come in with like a squiggly scratchy method and just add some highlights. And what you'll notice as you start to go around your miniature, there'll be some darker points from that mottled effect. And what I like to do under each one is just add a little bright highlight underneath, and that'll automatically, without adding any chipping or anything like that, it'll just turn it into some chips or dinks on the armour. And once you're done, you'll have something that looks a little bit like this. And as I said, if you do want to knock that effect back a little bit or push it into that warmer purple magenta tone, then you can get your voluptuous pink. And I'd recommend watering this down or using the contrast medium, just so it's not as powerful and strong, because it is quite a pigmented colour. And just very lightly glaze some onto those highlight points and pushing it into those shadow areas, and then that'll just warm everything up a little bit and turn everything into that nice magenta tone. That's an optional step if you want to do that. If you've gone too far, of course you can go back and forth for these colors. That's the nice thing about these effects with the brushes. Say if you've added a little bit too much blue or a little bit too much fulgrim pink, you can always go back to your previous color and knock it back and knock it down a little bit if you do go a little bit bright. The optional step with the voluptuous pink is entirely up to you. So from this point forward, everything across all the three miniatures is exactly the same. Now, after you've done all the armor and everything like that, now it's a good point to base coat the rest of your colors. And I'll go over some of the main pieces of this color. However, refer to the links in the description for some of the little nuances that you might want. So I'm going to come in with AK Gunmetal as a base coat for all my silver, metallic and trim areas, and just highlight these up with any bright silver that you've got, whether that's AK, some Citadel ones. For this one you might use like rung, fang, steel, something like that. As long as you've got a dark silver and a bright silver, and sort of dry brush those highlights on at that point. And then for the gold, I used AK Rusty Gold and gave that a highlight of peridot alchmey. Now once we've done those is where we can get a little bit creative again and shift some colours and alter them a little bit using washes and contrast paints. Now because the Emperor's Children are purple, for one of the Noise Marines, and just to make him look a little bit more vibrant, I used some Druchii Violet wash and just gave that a wash over the silver trim areas. And then for the other one, which was more of the blackish blue one, for that I came in with the voluptuous pink, as I wanted all his trim to be a silver metallic pink, which is very flamboyant, I may add. So I just came in, and I did require a couple of coats of the voluptuous pink against those silver metallic areas, just because it was so bright, and you know, it took a little bit, 2 coats to get it to where I needed it to be. And then I also, for one of them, went into the golden sections as well and washed that with the Druchii Violet as well. Now, if you want a more grimdark, dirty look, I'd highly recommend coming in with the contrast paint Rattling Grime, and this will just give it a more of like an aged, worn, dirty look. And then at this point, it's just a case of base coating or painting in the rest of the colours on your miniature. Again, I don't want to take up too much of your time. These are just very simple base coats. For the eyes, a really quick and effective way to do the eyes is paint them white and then go in with the contrast paint of your choice. I used Peridot turquoise for mine, but again, you can use any colour that you like. Now at this point, once you've got everything base coated out and all the main sections done, we can move into weathering. Now of course, for this I am going to be using the Villainy Inks range, and you can come in with the Villainy Inks Goons Grime. These are enamel washers, and you might notice during the video as well that one does look a little bit darker than the rest, and that's because I'm using their new one, which is Decrepit Filth. This is a very dark brown black wash, and no, it's not available just at the moment. It's going to be available in the next coming weeks to the end of this month. But if you wanted to paint yours and you want an alternative product to use, I'd highly recommend something like Absalom 502 Smoke, which is an oil paint. Now, a lot of the questions I always get asked around using oils and enamels is, do you need to varnish? You can if you want. I personally don't do that. But if you want to do that to protect anything, then you can do while you're practicing. But if you want to learn more about the reductive technique and ways that you can add them, pull it back off, and a lot of this around the grime, I've covered it extensively in a lot of my videos, and I don't want to keep beating the dead horse or whatever that term is. But there is a video over at the Grimdark Compendium called the reductive technique. Again, I'll link it in the description below if you want to go over and check that out and learn a little bit more about these products and how to use them. But once you've done all that and you've worked your way around it and removed them back off, that's pretty much it for your miniatures. There's nothing really else much to add. If you want to come in with some things like Dirty Downs Roast and add some weathering elements, you can do that. If you really want to take your time and do some chipping and all that sort of good stuff, you feel free to do that as well. Now, I know it might seem like we've missed a lot of the little things out of this video, but this is sort of a part 2, more of a continuation of my previous Emperor's Children video. So if you want to learn a little bit more, go over and check that out, and it'll give you some more hints and tips around some of the little finer details like the skin and the flesh applications, all that sort of good stuff. As I say, this is one of more of a bigger project where it's the first video and this is the continuation. This video I just really wanted to go over some alternative colour schemes and ways that you can apply them, because it's very hard running a channel like this when I prefer to use an airbrush for some of my applications. If anything, I prefer to use a mix of both, but I know a lot of people don't have airbrushes and all that sort of good stuff, so I just wanted to cover some alternative schemes. And again, if anything, I wanted you to give you a ton of ingredients and you can pick and choose which of those colours and ingredients that you want to add to your miniatures. But I hope you've been able to take something away from this. I didn't want this to be a massive long tutorial where you've got to sit for hours. How do you do that bit? How do you do that bit? Most of this stuff can be found in most of my other videos, especially the first Emperor's Children video. But I hope you have enjoyed it and been able to cherry pick and take something away from it. If you want to learn anything more, I'm sure in the future I'll be doing some more Emperor's Children videos, especially with the release of the new miniature lines that they've got coming along the way, the ones that they haven't released yet. And of course, don't you worry guys, there is definitely going to be a fulgrim video once that miniature is released, so make sure you are hitting that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of those videos. And just as a quick plug for this video, over at the Grimdark Compendium I have got this weekend coming out releasing the first episode of my Kree course. It's a 5-part episode and that will be releasing this weekend, so make sure you go over and check that out as well, because I don't want you to miss out on the Krieg. I will have some more Krieg videos coming on this channel specifically, but that one is a massive deep dive. It's a 5-part series, so yeah, make sure you head over there and check that out as well. So until next time guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you've got any questions, hit me up in the comment sections below. Can't wait to see what you guys have come up with. If a lot of people do reach out to me with following my tutorials and stuff. If you want to send me some of your photos or anything like that, feel free to do that and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But until next time guys, thanks for watching and I will catch you in my next video.